all those platforms, which are invaluable in their own right, are segregating us from that environment in which we as human beings need to be immersed. And the only way I can see us really being part of that environment, really going out there and doing extensive research as human beings, melding with technology, is to become aquanauts, or to be aquanauts and go out there for extended periods of time, not hours or minutes, but days, weeks, months, and maybe even longer.
Welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Sea Has Many Voices podcast. I'm Dr. Greg Stone, and it's a really amazing week. I've got my great friend Fabien Cousteau, part of an amazing family legacy, and he's an amazing individual in his own right. And hello, Fabien, how are you?
Hi, Greg, how are you doing? I love your nautical theme.
What's that? Oh, you mean the background? Does it look nautical?
Your background, yeah, it's great.
It's me, actually. I have my little, this case here is my little treasure trove of little artifacts and stuff that I've accumulated over the years. And I see you've got a virtual background. That must be a Proteus, huh?
Yeah, well, with this lockdown and all that, it feels like I need to at least pretend like I'm underwater, since we're separating at home. So
I'll put on one of my backgrounds and see if it works, and then we'll get going here. This is one of my favorites.
Ah, yes.
How do I look on your end? Is it broken up, or does it work?
Looks good. Looks good. There's a little ghosting if you move too fast, but that happens with Zoom.
I'm probably going to take it off here in a minute, but that's Canton Island in the Phoenix Islands. It's in the middle of, I mean, if you take the Pacific Ocean and turn it into a bullseye, this is the bullseye, right?
Wow.
Right on the equator, and it's one of my study sites that I've been going to for like 20 years, and it's got the strongest, most resilient corals I've ever encountered. They've been exposed to the oscillations of El Nino for millennia, right? So they've been bred to withstand these temperature swings of like 10 degrees centigrade without any problem at all. Whereas more constant environments like the Great Barrier Reef, for example, if it goes 2-3 degrees off, they just fall over dead. So that's an appropriate one for me for now. And then you've got your really cool looking concept there. Now that's Proteus, right?
Well, that's just one. That's just a virtual background. But if we want to look a little bit more closely, this is Proteus back here.
Okay.
I don't know that this one has a diver in it, but it's shallow enough so that you can have a diver.
I do want to learn all about that. You know, I just saw you recently in Aspen. That was really a pleasure, and I did get a sense of it there, but I really didn't get the details, and I intentionally waited until today. Real time on this. You have, when I was growing up, of course, your grandfather's shows were deeply inspiring to me. But also, in those days, you'd get like Popular Mechanics, and these magazines would have covers with underwater cities on them. And it was like this thing you thought was going to happen. And then suddenly it didn't happen, and everything went into space, which I'm also supportive of. But you're reminding me of those exciting visions from the 60s and 70s where we actually thought about expanding and exploring and living under the water. So tell us about what that is.
Well, and that's a great point, Greg. I think you and I dream very similar dreams in many ways. And yeah, back in I wasn't around till the late 60s. That's when I was born. But back in the 60s, I mean, I guess what's old is new again, and we're dreaming dreams that they were thinking of back then. And between space and ocean exploration, there was certainly a lot of parallels. Obviously, space, at least in the next few decades after that, gained the upper hand in terms of the development of technologies, the development of of the ability of staying out for extended periods of time, including, of course, the famous International Space Station, which orbits our planet today, which is inspiring in many ways, of course. But at the end of the day, and obviously we're, at least for me, I'm a little biased, but I would imagine that ocean exploration, as it pertains to living for extended periods of time, was in many ways sidelined for the ocean. Habitats have existed in the past, as you mentioned, starting with the conch shelf series of habitats with my grandfather, conch shelf 1, and then Sea Lab and Hydrolab and Hildegard and all those other ones that that a lot of various countries and institutions had put out there. But ultimately, space won out in the short term on some of that. And here's the inside of Proteus, by the way. And so I think it's high time that we revisit that in a way that's conducive to expanding the quiver of technologies for ocean exploration. We've explored less than 5% of our ocean world to date, of course, all 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of volume. So there's a lot out there, especially in the mid and deep layers. But even the shallow layers have barely been explored in any extensive terms. And so to be able to build an underwater habitat or house underwater akin to you know, a modern day Aquarius or modern day conch shelf would really give us a platform to do extensive research on site of that final frontier. And I think that's a really, really important point that we're missing. We have boats, we have AUVs, ROVs, and probes to some extent. We have submersibles, of course, but invariably all those platforms, which are invaluable in their own right, are segregating us from that environment in which we as human beings need to be immersed. And the only way I can see us really being part of that environment, really going out there and doing extensive research as human beings, melding with technology, is to become aquanauts or to be aquanauts and go out there for extended periods of time, not hours or minutes, but days, weeks, months, and maybe even longer.
Very well articulated, Fabien. Very well articulated, and I totally agree with that philosophy. Having, you know, I've got saturation experience like you do. I've been in the, I think you've got the Aquarius up now behind you. You spent famously 31 days in it, I think, was it?
31 days, yeah. Yeah, and this is, for those who don't know what Aquarius really is, it's the last remaining undersea marine laboratory, and it's about 550 internal square feet, and up to six people live within that nice cozy space. So anyone who has a studio apartment in New York City and some roommates will probably be familiar with that kind of space limitation.
I'm so glad you gave me that number, because I've been, you know, I've done 3 missions in her. We had them all. Mine were only like 7 days. One was 10 days, and the other one was, I think, 8 days. You know, it's kind of like shortish missions. But I never knew the square footage. I used to live in a studio apartment that was 400 square feet. So I
roommates.
Also, you know, I want to emphasize one of your points, which is a very good one. You said 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of ocean, right? Mm-hmm. Now, people I found don't really have a good sense of what a billion means. Now, I'm going to give you a little tool that has been helpful to me. How long do you think a million seconds adds up to?
Well, I'd have to do a quick calculation of that.
12 or 15 days.
2 days.
12 or 15 days is a million seconds. Okay. Now, how long do you think a billion seconds is?
About a few months. I'm guessing.
Years. It's 32 years.
32 years. Okay, great.
You go from a million seconds is 12 days.
Yeah.
And a billion seconds is 32 years. A trillion seconds, I believe, is about 32,000 years. So the point is, 3.4 billion cubic kilometers is an enormous amount of volume.
Yeah.
You know, people think about million and billion. It's hard to like get it's an exponential transformation between the two. That's a huge volume of that people need to realize that you've just described on our planet. It's the largest known livable space in the universe that we're aware of. On planet Earth. What is it? It's 98% of the livable space on the planet is in the ocean or something like that. It's really high.
Yeah, and that's what I try and quote, because what people don't relate to, because we're human beings, we live on a veneer, right? That terrestrial veneer. And so you add that third dimension into this living space discussion, all of a sudden it becomes a huge place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, the way you built the argument about how we need to be there, we need to live there. You know, I'm totally with you, because when I was in Aquarius, and by the way, we should try to call him during this podcast, our friend Ian Somerhalder. When Ian Somerhalder and I came down to visit you during your famous record-breaking 31-day saturation mission, you know, it's like, for me, it was like coming home, because I know that thing so well. But when I was in it, I just, you know, I'd spend all day outside, and then in the evening, if my dive buddy didn't want to go, I had a problem with one of my dive buddies. He was like he wanted to stay inside most of the time. I could go out on the hookah, and you know, it's just like, it's a different thing. You really get to know the reef around that aquarium, around that habitat, like you can't during normal, you know, tank dives from the surface. So these visions for living in the ocean, I believe will come true one day as technology increases, and exponentially it makes these things more possible. And it was really a theme in my last book, The Soul of the Sea and the Age of the Algorithm, where I was looking at past industrializations and trying to look a little bit over the horizon into the fourth industrial revolution, which is big data, renewable energy, high-tech solutions, and it was co-authored with Nishan Dignarian. And it may be that one day we can get a technology that where material science and manufacturing could make spaces underwater quickly, you know, and affordably. And that's where we humans have always been. Part of our nature is to go, explore, and expand, and right? And we've just finished colonizing the whole planet terrestrially. Now, what's left?
Well, some of us anyway. I mean, others would rather have someone else go out there and do it because for various reasons. But we're all, at the very least, armchair explorers, and we love to follow these adventures to the some of us who want to step into the unknown and take those risks, of course. But those risks, if well calculated, are definitely worth it. And you've touched on a whole bunch of points there that I found very interesting during Mission 31, and I'm sure during your missions as well, which is everyone reacts differently. And something that we tried to make sure was judging the candidates for Mission 31 based on their physiological and psychological parameters. And you were mentioning that you loved going out into the water column and your dive buddy would rather stay inside. We had some very interesting data points with regard to our 6-person team. Granted, it's only a 6-person team, but the reactions, the emotional reactions of staying underwater for a long period of time in something the size of a school bus, or based out of something the size of a school bus. And that was that I felt like it was home. After 31 days, I didn't want to go back to the surface. That was my most depressing moment of the mission, is having to give up that luxury of time at the bottom to go to the surface. Whereas a couple of our team members had various different reactions. One of them was happy to come back to the surface and rejoin the family and friends and everything else. A couple of the others could have stayed down a couple more weeks. We had one person who had to be switched out in the middle because he was more than ready to get out. And so that was something that could feasibly, if the time was extended, could have been potentially very dangerous, because when people are starting to feel trapped and maybe more than uncomfortable, they start reacting in ways that are unpredictable and are in extreme environments extraordinarily dangerous. So you have to judge all of that. I do believe that we pretty much have the technology at this point, maybe not the economics, but the technology at this point to build habitats for extended deployment. And we have to take into account the human factor, of course, to make it as homey, as comfortable as possible, so that you can bring with you some of the elements that would extend the psychological parameters of stay underwater. I don't know if, and physiologically, of course, we can tackle some of those issues as well. But it really, there's a very specific psychological makeup for those who want to venture forth for extended periods of time into that alien world. And it's what makes astronauts astronauts. It's what makes certain people want to sign on to colonize Mars. But I would imagine the vast majority of us enjoy this little oasis in space too much to go that far out into space.
Well, you brought up something really, I think, important and interesting. Well, maybe more interesting than important, but it was the psychological component of who can withstand that kind of environment. And that leads to NASA actually has used the Aquarius as a training site for astronauts because it simulates in many ways being in space, having to think about pressure differentials all the time and living in a closed environment. And I don't know if they still do or not, but I know for a while they were. But I want to point out to our listeners and viewers that the pressure differentials is something that is an enormous challenge in the ocean because of if you go up into space, you and I are in 14 pounds per square inch is the pressure around us. And that's essentially the weight of 1 square inch up into the atmosphere. That's the weight of the atmosphere coming down on us.
1 ATM.
Every 33 feet in the ocean, you add another 14 pounds per square inch.
That's 10 meters for those who speak metric.
The
vast majority of the planet.
Cultural background, I think, is another key to your success and amazing thing. As you go down in the ocean, you hit that every 10 meters. Up in space, it's only once. So if you go to the Smithsonian and you look at the spacecrafts that are on display there, I'm always amazed how thin they are. They're like made of tin foil because it's not the pressure they deal with up there. There's other factors that they have to deal with. But the ocean has a tremendous pressure barrier to get down deep. How deep do you plan to go with it?
Well, that's a great point, and one that I'm glad you brought up because most people don't even think about it. Well, I make this mistake all the time of equating aquanauts and astronauts as being very, very similar in form and function. But you're absolutely right. Physiologically, you're subject to a lot of variances underwater. And in some cases, in some definitions, it's an even more extreme environment. And although before you become an astronaut, you first have to become a scuba diver, and it's great training and anecdotes for what you may be facing in space, especially with the exercises that they have to do. The further down you go in the water column, the more pressure is exerted on bodies, including physical bodies, as well as technology, as well as different equipment. I got to tell you, before I answer your question, I'm sorry, some of the things that we never even thought of during Mission 31, and I don't know if it was the same when you went down, but our batteries, our lithium-ion batteries were acting very differently depending on the types of batteries that they were and depending on types of technology that we were using, whether it was cameras or other. Some days they would charge well, some days they wouldn't, some days they would drain very quickly. It was not part of our studies, not part of our research, but something definitely to point out as we talking about pressure exerting a lot of difficulties on various things. And as far as an aquanaut, being saturated, even just at 3 atmospheres, right, at 60 feet, 66 feet, whatever, it allows you to go out in that water column because you're saturated I'll put in quotations indefinitely, but certainly for extended periods of time, as you saw. And because we were able to spend that much more time in the water column, that underwater city, in the case of Aquarius, which is a coral reef, the residents of the reef started accepting you as part of the reef because you were consistently going back, and they didn't perceive you as an alien threat from the surface. Diving down, scuba divers, especially for me, I find that limit of time very frustrating, coming from the bottom, and then having to go back up. So that unprecedented access is pretty amazing. As far as going deep,
Yeah.
because you're starting at 3 atmospheres, you can go down to 150 feet for 5.5 hours with no deco time, and so on and so forth. So it does extend the range of an aquanaut to go much deeper. Proteus itself, being the first an international space station underwater, will have a little brother much deeper at about 70, 75 meters, which allows us to be based on heliox and extends our range even further as human beings. So now we're talking about going down to 6, 7, or more 100 feet. Now, commercial divers have been doing this in very short stints for oil exploration and other reasons. But for us, it allows us to do science much deeper. There are physiological limits. Beyond that, it becomes very, very complicated. But until we perfect liquid breathing and all that. But what allows us to go deeper is the fact that this future International Space Station underwater will have a submersible docking station and ROV deployment. So we will be able to extend the range beyond physiological limits.
That's really that's very inspiring to me. And do you envision the initial location, I believe, is in the Caribbean? Is that right?
Well, yeah, first location is going to be in Curacao. They've been extraordinarily excited and wonderful hosts for this, and so we're excited about that. The idea is not just to have one habitat in one location, although it is a very target-rich environment for many, many reasons. It's got a beautiful coral reef as far as the Caribbean is concerned. There are a lot of issues also happening in the Caribbean, as you know. And so that gives us a fantastic monitoring station and research station in one, so we can get a better finger on the pulse of the Caribbean. But having one or two in the Pacific, maybe North Pacific, South Pacific, having one in the Indian Ocean, having one in the Mediterranean, and so on, and a couple in the Atlantic, would allow us to have a network, to have a much better feeling for what's going on in the ocean, so that we stop becoming reactive on land in terms of our decision making and start becoming proactive and predictive of what's going on before things happen.
You know, Fabien, I feel a moment right now in history where oceanography, ocean exploration, ocean science, however you want to call it, is potentially being disrupted by initiatives like yours, and there's a few others out there. One I can point to is Aqualink. If you haven't seen it yet, Pete Reeve went to this island, actually behind me, a year and a half ago, to install temperature loggers on the reef with me. And, you know, I went down with a pneumatic drill that I bought at Home Depot and ran it off of my first stage. And after you drill 2 holes, you got to throw it out and get a new drill because it's not made to be used underwater. And I had underwater cement, and then I put the temperature logger in, and with a buoy underwater to try to hopefully find it a year from now, because it'll record the temperature every 30 seconds. And afterwards, he said to me, "Greg, is this the state of the art in your marine biology?" And I said, "I'm afraid it is." He said, "This is archaic." And he went and founded a company called Aqualink that has these buoys that record pictures, temperature, and other sensors real time, transmit it to a buoy, to a satellite, back to where you are. And listeners, viewers, aqualink.com, go to it. If you're a researcher or want to be a citizen scientist, you can participate and become part of a new investigation of the ocean, which is very different from the way we've done it in the past. Like you have proposed here with these observatories. And I want you to know that I'm personally and professionally committed to supporting you in any way that I can, because I love it. I just love it. I think this is definitely the future. And starting in the Atlantic is a great idea. That's where I started, where you started. I always like to remind myself that it's the youngest ocean on the planet, mm-hmm. and a relatively small one. And then the Pacific is like for me, the ultimate, destination point, because that's the highest biodiversity. You put the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean together, it's still smaller than the Pacific. It's like the mother Pacific Ocean. So I started in the Caribbean in my own research career. Well, I started in Boston, actually, in the Gulf of Maine, diving in very cold water. But I got down to the warmth of the Caribbean studying whales in the 1980s. But the Pacific is really where I feel at home.
It is a beautiful place, and there's validity to each one of those locations. The Caribbean's great because it's a test bed, because there's so much human activity in the area. You can certainly monitor the impact that has on the ecosystem as well. From everything from noise pollution, which no one talks about, to of course all the other things that people talk about, plastics and so on and so forth, as well as looking at in all these various parts, the microscopic to the macroscopic can really bring in some pretty significant data points and some pretty significant research, especially, we're talking about nothing but COVID and everything else these days because we're all facing this pandemic. But that's a great point, or a great example of something we can seek answers to and combat by coming out with the answers from the ocean. I mean, it's a chemical soup.
Absolutely. And you've picked the best place, by the way, in the Caribbean. It's as close as you get to the Pacific in that area.
We love the variance. It's on a seamount, so you get depth very quickly. So for pragmatic reasons, it's great. We also are going to be located in a marine sanctuary, so hopefully it's not as I've been there, and it seems like a great area that will hopefully be the lesser disturbed of the areas in the Caribbean. But there's good water flow in that area. There are pelagics. There's, of course, residents. There's all sorts of really neat stuff that we can dive deep into, no pun intended. But, so we put up on the OLC's site a little bit of information for Proteus for those who want to dive in a little bit deeper. No pun intended, which is Fabien Cousteau, OLC.org. But ultimately, all these technologies, be it the buoys, the probes, are part of a matrix that adds to the quiver of technologies and approaches that we can do that research from, that we absolutely need to, because whether you live on the ocean front or 1,000 miles away, we're all beholden to the ocean for our health, our well-being, and our existence in general, and especially for the future of our generations.
Oh, so exquisite. Yes, and by the way, we do have a podcast on sound pollution with Dr. Simone Bauer-Pickering and movie soundtrack composer, musician John Powell. It's a fascinating discussion about sound and sound pollution in the ocean, listeners and viewers, which you can check out. You've just really put it well. Our dependence on the ocean, and by the way, we're going to put all those links on our website so people can find you and find the projects, and I will promote it. This is the future. We're in an entrepreneurial time again. For some strange reason, you'd think that time would have passed, but it hasn't. Along with you, the buoy system I just described, Aqualink, I know a younger scientist named Austin Gallagher, who's come up with a deep camera drop system for under $10,000.
Yeah.
The system goes down to 6 kilometers, Fabien, and he can set it, and then you send an acoustic signal, it drops the sacrificial weight, and it comes back up with footage. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with, we used to call them rope cams, because we had to put them on the end of a big long rope and pull them up and down. And $7,000 of that is the acoustic release mechanism. So if there's a workaround, you could get those down to a few $1,000s. Now imagine if you had those distributed with citizen scientists and scientists and had a systematic exploration or even a wiki approach that you then retroactively systematize. I think we are at a point where our knowledge of the ocean can go through like a rapid expansion, almost like the universe in the early phases of, remember there was the rapid expansion phase and then it started, we need one of those for oceans, I think. And I'm all for it. Go ahead.
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's one of the things that always has puzzled me is at least in the United States and North America, we spend 100 times more in space exploration than we do ocean exploration. And that's shifting a little bit, but it's not shifting fast enough. And I'm a big, like you, I'm a big proponent of space exploration. I love it. You know, sign me up if we're going to go see and explore the oceans of Europa and Mars. But, but you know, this is such an amazing place. And as you mentioned, we need more attention on the ocean because of the fact it's pragmatically speaking, it's our life support system, but also because there's so much opportunity out there, that 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of volume, and the fact that it houses 90% of our species, many of them, the millions and millions of them that are still unknown, and we can go out there with affordable technology. We can go out there with platforms such as Proteus. We can go out there with new technologies that have yet to be invented. There's so much opportunity out there to really go and learn more about this bed, this thing that makes us so unique in the universe, or at least in our galaxy right now, which is this oasis in space. It does afford us a lot of opportunity, technologically, economically, and of course on a life-sustaining level. But we know so little about it. It's puzzling to me we haven't gone out there more.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. You know, the name of this series is "The Sea Has Many Voices." We borrowed that from T.S. Eliot's writing, and it was very by intention. This program, this series, is meant to get a variety of voices to the table because we believe, and I know you do too, that it's time society actually orient itself to the ocean, which we have not done yet. We've been so terrestrially oriented. We've sort of forgotten about the ocean, yet the ocean is the life support system, as you described it, for our planet. And the fate of humanity and the fate of the oceans are the same. As the ocean goes, so goes humanity. And it's high time we get off in American lingo, get off our horse and to it. You know, we got
This is a family show, right?
It brings me back to your part of a legacy, the Cousteau legacy, a very powerful, important legacy. And you're bicultural, French American. You know, you sound to me like a guy that grew up in Connecticut, right? But you can go to
Alien. I've moved 32 times in my life.
Paris and no one would know the difference, right? You're like both. Can you talk about all that a little bit? Is there?
Sure. Well, you know,
Go ahead.
It being the third generation in my family, it's a double-edged sword. First of all, it's a blessing because I had the opportunity to have the best teachers out there, not just my family, but the crew of Calypso and Alcyon, and going off on expedition from a young age. Scuba diving really since I was 4. And then, of course, more importantly, going off on expeditions from 7 years on. I was exposed to people who were brilliant, who were pioneers, who were intrepid and so well-versed in their world. I couldn't have asked for a better classroom. And being brought along on these adventures way before cell phones and all that stuff. And being immersed 100% in an aquatic environment that very few people had gotten a chance at that point, and even to this day get a chance to explore in any fundamentally important way, gave sensibilities that are tools today that hopefully I can use in communicating the beauty and importance of this alien environment. And as part of the mission, as part of the philosophy, the most important thing that we can offer, that I can offer as a third generation, is not only the storytelling ability, but being able to communicate something that could be deemed education, but in an empowering way to the general public, so that they can get a better sense of the importance and the fragility of our ocean world. Being a storyteller, and as a matter of fact, I wasn't actually planning on doing this, but now that we mentioned storytelling, or I mentioned storytelling, I mean, being able to share some of these adventures through books like this from Simon & Schuster. This one's The Great White Shark Adventure. This one's Journey to the Arctic. And we have a few more coming out in that series. Brings virtual adventure in a comic book or in an illustrated format, thanks to Joe and James and our partnership, to 8 to 12-year-olds or young at heart that could go on these adventures and learn more about our ocean world and the importance and the excitement of it without necessarily getting wet. And so it's always a challenge, because it's a double-edged sword. As a Cousteau, everyone has preconceived notions. My grandfather was a pioneer. He inspired hundreds of millions of people around the world. There's no arguing that. And he invented some tools that we all still use today. I mean, scuba is still around, and submersibles and all that sort of thing for scientific research. And so it's not something that I ever try to compare myself to, because people do it anyway for me, but it brings about preconceived notions that are always a struggle in these conversations, because he was unique, and they were at an era that is very different than today, but at the same time we have opportunities to, and I say we because it's the family, but we have an opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants and really propel the message forward in a way that that hopefully will resound for the next few generations.
Yes, well, I was one of those hundreds of millions that was profoundly influenced by your grandfather. You're the grandson of Jacques Cousteau, one of the grandsons of Jacques Cousteau, and he was the co-inventor of the modern day scuba regulator, two-stage regulator, which was the breakthrough technology that allowed us to be untethered to the surface and swim around freely like the fish, essentially. And I look at in my last book, Soul to Sea and the Age of the Algorithm, I look at the ocean, the decadal changes in the ocean from about 1950 onwards. And I look at the 1960s as the Enlightenment era, brought about by your grandfathers giving everyday access to anyone that had. I remember the first regulator I bought was like $30. You went down to Leech Mears and you could go diving, and it was an amazing transformation. You suddenly could see things down there. And there is an expectation, and there is a bit of I don't want to call it a burden, but a opportunity and a responsibility that comes with you. And you've cut yourself through. You've got your cred. You've been out there. You've done the stuff that makes it possible for you to speak with authority and bring the world new knowledge. And I've seen you underwater in a saturated environment, and you and I both do work with Discovery Channel and other types. And we've always last few years, you and I have talked about working together, and we really do have to find a tangible, expeditionary component or something. My great mentor Teddy Tucker from Bermuda knew your grandfather. And I got a lot of stories from him. I used to go to his house and hang out, because he was in Bermuda doing a program back in, I don't know when it was, 50s or 60s, So I've got all these great stories, which I've even yet to have a chance to share with you, secondhand, of course, because I never knew him. Well,
I'd love to hear them, because all those behind the scenes stories are some of the best stories out there.
Yeah, I've got a good one. Yeah. We're going to have to put it on the other channel.
You know, it's we'll have to talk offline, but I've heard one recently from a local Belizean about my grandfather visiting in the 70s. That was the expedition that made the Blue Hole famous in Belize. But it's a funny one. But I'll have to leave that for another day, or when we meet.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah. And we'll listeners, not cutting you out. We will bring you these stories. We have
I want to be conscious of the fact this is a family show.
That's all. Yeah, no, he was a great man. You know, one thing that Teddy always told me, Teddy Tucker, my mentor, who changed my life, he said the reason Cousteau, he called him Cousteau as a generic, the reason Jacques Cousteau was so successful was he put the time in, Teddy always said.
Yes.
He'd go somewhere and he would sit for, not sit, he would stay on location for months until he got it.
Yeah.
Until he got it. He said, Teddy said that was his secret. He said he made it, Teddy made a joke once. He said, Jacques Cousteau could make a documentary in a bathtub. You know, it was meant to be a compliment that he was like that good.
Well, but you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, in today's world and instant gratification and everything else, especially, and, you know, of course, cell phones and mobile devices don't make it any easier frame-wise, but nature doesn't care about our timelines and production, you know, schedules and things like that. You have to sit there and dedicate the time to learn about that particular subject matter. And you know, we're all trying to rush through these things, but nature doesn't care. It's going to go on its own timeline, and we have to figure out. And it's thanks to people like yourself and Teddy Tucker and that whole network of folks who have dedicated their lives to oceanic research and just to research in general, that we're learning more about this amazing little planet that we live on. You know, it's not a one-man band, you know, a Fabien Cousteau or Jacques Cousteau or whatever. It's really about the team. It's a team effort for all of us getting together and doing what we do best to be able to learn more about this so that we can make better decisions.
You know, it really is about the team, and it's so important, and you're good at this, you're really good at this, that when you speak to, you're a great speaker, when you speak to the public, that you bring them into the story. It's their story too. It's not just your story. That's a big issue for some speakers, that they make it about themselves and what they did, whereas you bring the world into you make it possible for the world to be part of your narrative. And I think that's the key to our future, and also putting the time in. We've gotten too used to, like in oceanography now, man, you get these young scientists, they want to find out what little island is close to the boat that they can fly into and get helicoptered out for their 4 days of research and then out, you know, whereas back in the real days, 1950s, 60s, when oceanography was, you know, blooming, and we came up with plate tectonic theory and all the really important concepts, those guys used to go out for 3 months at a time.
Yep.
And they would write their papers on the boat on the way back. They'd meet with their graduate students for a week or two, and then they go back out.
Yep. I find that to be the best way. I mean, we have the luxury of time in the field nowadays is quite a luxury. I mean, it obviously costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time, and to try and convince the powers that be to dedicate those resources is getting more and more difficult. The last time I remember spending more than a few weeks on site was in the Amazon River with my father and my sister during Ocean Adventures for PBS, which was the result of some of that. And we spent we went back several times. We spent a total of 11 months in the field. Now, granted, not in all in one place. The Amazon is a huge water basin, but we were able to cover a lot of topics in that amount of time because we were on site, and of course, good pre-prep and everything else. And it's important for people to understand that you need to spend the time out there. You need to go out there, and sometimes, often, it's not glorious. Often it's, you know, a lot of sitting and waiting and hoping that you're in the right place at the right time for the action to happen. And a lot of times it's just a matter of studying the same thing over and over and over again every day. And you know this better than anybody. But the end result is a very rich story, a very rich data set, and a huge, hopefully a huge reward of learning more about that particular subject matter.
Yeah, you know, to your point, and unfortunately, we're going to have to wind this down pretty soon here, largely because we are a slave to having manageable in terms of time. But to your point, I live in California now, as you know, and you visited me here, and I visited you in New York where you live. And I'm lucky enough to be right on the water. And I wouldn't call it a hobby. I did my PhD on dolphins. And there's a population of dolphins that live right offshore here in front of my condominium. And I go out every morning with my computer and my cell phone and start my workday with my drone, but mostly just looking. And I want to share with you some video that I just took just the other day, which was pretty interesting. If I can make it come up here. Yeah, here it is. Can you see that?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Now, this is unedited drone footage from Santa Monica, Pacific Palisades. These are Tursiops truncatus, the famous bottlenose dolphin flipper. And they live right here, right next to California, Los Angeles airport, and all the activity that's around. You know, we are literally, you know, one just rolled over to look at the drone. I always think that's funny. He went on his side to look up because he could hear the high frequency sounds coming. You're not scared or anything like that. But we are part of the ocean system now, Fabien. The wilderness has a new meaning today. And I think we are part of it. You know, humanity has become part of the ocean, earth, atmospheric, terrestrial system. And we have to accept that. And we have to make it work. We have to do it sustainably and even regeneratively. I'm going to stop sharing the dolphins now.
I love it.
I love the work that you do. Love you and everything. And let's find that destination, that mutual target where we can get, you know, tanks on our backs and in the water and do our thing, expand our knowledge of the ocean and make a program or something, a research project.
Well, let's go to that beautiful island that you're doing your research on, right behind you, right there. Right. And you know, just on an end note for with regard to dolphins, as we've noticed, and it was unfortunately very little reported in the news, because of the stay-at-home orders and the pandemic and the lower human activity. Nature was starting to come out of its shell. You could see bigger, you know, pods of dolphins going in places that they used to go, but they stopped because there's too much human activity, and they were coming back. You know, in Italy, for example, and other places, and it's an illustrator or a highlight that we are having a huge impact on our ecosystem because of our lack of consciousness of our big footprint. And if the more we can connect with the ocean, the more we can connect with our ecosystem, the more we can look forward to living with the planet than on the planet. And at the end of the day, it's exactly what you're highlighting, which is in order for us to have an optimistic future, we need to be more integrated in our thoughts, in our emotions, with our little oasis in space.
What a great note to end our podcast on. Thank you. You're a great communicator, Fabien. And I appreciate your time, your friendship, and what you're doing. And look forward to, can I invite you back on the show someday?
Absolutely, Greg. It'd be an absolute pleasure. And just as importantly as that, I can't wait to see you in person so we can go diving together. As a matter of fact, you know, diving is the great social isolator, right? So we might be able to do that even during the pandemic.
That's right. And there's no virus going to get from anybody underwater. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you take care, my friend. Thank you, listeners, for another episode of The Sea Has Many Voices. Thanks very much to our sponsors, the Bucksbaum Foundation, Wendy Benchley, John Powell, Ed Shine, and others, Deep Green Metals. And we'll see you next week. Thank you. Thank you, Fabien.
Thank you very much.